I'd like to welcome everybody to our May Canada Wildfire webinar. My name is Karen. I am the General Manager at Canada Wildfire, and I'm coming to you from Leduc, Alberta. I reside on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of various Indigenous people and the home of the Métis homeland. I'd like us all to take a second to think about the places that we live, work, recreate, and play and pay homage to the people who have taken care of the land for time immemorial. Really excited to have you all here today. We have two amazing people with us. We have Georgina and Ashley, and they're going to be talking about a research project that they've worked on together. So welcome, Georgina. Welcome, Ashley. I'm going to hand it over to you and not take any more of your time. I'm really excited to hear about your project and what you have to share with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. We're so excited to be here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. We worked on this research project from 2021 all the way to 2024 when we finished. It's actually almost a month since almost a year since I defended my master's thesis, which this research was based on. And I'm joining today from the unceded ancestral lands of wildland-urban First Nation and the Tonquachin Council in Whitehorse, Yukon Territory. And Ashley, I believe you're in Stswec'mc Xget'tem territory at the Dog Creek office. Am I correct with that?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sweet. Okay, so we'll introduce ourselves. Ashley, take her away.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ashley Camille. I'm with Stswec'mc Xget'tem First Nation. I'm the Emergency and Crisis Response Coordinator. I also have been working with the Stewardship Department since 2022. I came in kind of halfway through Georgina's research and jumped on board and kind of was the community liaison or the community translator of some of the science to the community. I currently am working on transitioning from having emergency management under stewardship as its own department in our community. So that's what we'll be doing moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I feel like under Ashley's leadership, SXFN is getting more and more prepared. So can't wait to hear more about that later. My name's Georgina. I am a white settler. I did work in the stewardship department from 2018 to 2020 for Stswec'mc Xget'tem First Nation, right after I finished my undergrad, actually. And then after that, went back to school at the University of British Columbia and was supervised by Dr. Lori Daniels for my Master's of Science thesis. And I'm currently finishing work with Yukon Wildfires Prevention and Mitigation Unit. So I've been really lucky to work on Community Wildfire Protection Plan for the community I live in rural Yukon, Monson Lake, and Cascade Territory for the last 6 months, and do a whole bunch of other activities, a lot of community engagement about wildfire and emergency preparedness. So I feel really grateful for that. Thanks. A little overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to introduce Stswec'mc Xget'tem First Nation, talk about forests and fire and how they interact together and how they've changed throughout time, the relationship between the two. Talk about our research partnership, how it formed, and how we carried it out. Talk about the research findings, and then I'll pass it on to Ashley. Talk about wildfire in SXFN territory in recent years, as well as some of the impacts the research has had and other initiatives they have going on in Stswec'mc Xget'tem First Nation right now. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley to introduce Stswec'mc Xget'tem First Nation, or as we keep referring to it, SXFN.
The Stswec'mc Xget'tem, we are two nations we're one community, but two nations. So we have Xget'tem, which is where I am at, is just called Dog Creek. And we have Stswec'mc, which is Canoe Creek. We're separated by a mountain and a 45-minute drive. We are two regional districts as well, which come into play anytime we call 911 for any type of service in community. There's a lot of other boundaries that kind of crisscross and go around us as well that I've also had to learn about since moving back to community. We have, depending on the time of season, we have anywhere between 100 to 150 people in each community. One community being more young families. So Stswec'c'm has majority of the young families. Xget'tem and Dog Creek, we joke about us being the retirement community, as most of our residents are single adults or elders, people who are retired. And so that kind of comes into play when we're planning for emergencies and building that into our wildfire plans as well for pre-evacuation type situations.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that, this is a map on the screen. The Fraser River dissects the traditional territory, 1.3 million hectare traditional territory. Both Stswec'c'm and Xget'tem are separated from larger population centers such as Williams Lake or 100 Mile House by long, rough dirt roads that wind through interior Douglas fir forests and grasslands. Stswec'c'm Xget'tem First Nation folks have Aboriginal title and rights in their traditional territory and have stewarded and governed this place since time immemorial. And they currently, SXFN currently has a government-to-government agreement with BC that dictates joint management of lands and resources in the territory. And they're on the path to pursuing modern-day treaty. Fire has always been part of SXFN territory, but contemporary fires are concerning for SXFN for multiple reasons, with the most urgent reason being community safety. In the last 2 decades, SXFN has been on evacuation alert or order in 2010, 2017, 2018, and 2021 due to large, fast-moving fires within their traditional territory. Both oral history and dendrochronology research supports that SXFN lands have changed since settlers arrived in the mid-1800s. Previously, landscapes had more heterogeneity with more open forests and grassland components than today. And these conditions were maintained by frequent low-severity surface fires influenced by SXFN fire stewardship. When I was in the stewardship department, I had elders tell me some stories of being able to travel on horseback or by wagon through areas where it is now way too dense to do that today. So things have really changed. And yeah, Ashley, do you have anything to add there? Some of the things that you've heard from folks about changing forest conditions?
Yeah, it's been a pretty big topic in SXFN lately because it's also starting to impact food security, the harvesting of plants and herbs, as well as hunting for some of our families. So where we used to go, where it used to be like this, I remember helping with the cattle drives and things like that. We used to be able to ride our horses through and around with the cattle. And now we have to kind of stick to the more open grasslands areas as we're moving between the communities. What it looks like more now is more of what's kind of behind Georgina on her image there. So where we used to go and be able to just spam for like soap berries, we now have to go, instead of half an hour, we're going more like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And sometimes we're even collaborating with other communities to go harvest in their area.
Awesome. So why have these landscapes changed? There are a few factors that have influenced the change to the landscape, and a lot stems from the disruption of fire. So back in the 1860s, mid-1800s, newly introduced cattle ate a lot of grass, which may have stopped fires from spreading when ignitions happened. Shortly after that, Indigenous fire stewardship or cultural burning that occurred in dry forests around here in spring and fall was banned in the late 1800s. And then shortly after that, fire suppression was introduced, meaning that the province tried to put out every fire that started, and did so to try to save timber, which was becoming a well sought after resource in the area. And that was followed up. Suppression got a lot more advanced after World War II in BC, and especially after aerial suppression tactics began in the 1960s. So all this fire exclusion allowed for small trees, which typically would have been reduced periodically by fire, to establish and persist here, filling in grasslands and open forests. Then we have industrial forestry move in the mid 1900s with feller bunchers and large scale forestry equipment. And a lot of logging happened that targeted large fire resistant Douglas fir trees. In response to how this logging was impacting habitat for mule deer and old growth forest, BC government established legal objectives for forest harvesting in forests in SXFN traditional territory without SXFN consultation or consent. And this left SXFN territory with a lot of dense, even-aged Douglas fir forests, and these have contributed to the fires that we've all witnessed recently in interior dry forests in BC. So here is the result. Today's forest is a lot different, lots of dense small trees. As Ashley was saying, there's less accessible berries and traditional plants, more difficult to get out to hunt, more difficult access just to practice rights and title or culture on the land. And despite SXFN having that government to government agreement on joint management of lands with BC, the management of unceded crown lands creates and maintains forest structures that not only do not meet SXFN needs, but also increase their risk of community threatening wildfire. SXFN's experience with fire in recent years reflects on a larger trend in British Columbia. Hot, dry weather conditions and ignition sources have both increased due to climate change. And when we pair them with the dense forest structures found in SXFN territory, we are more likely to see the large, high-severity crown fires that have challenged community safety, greatly changed ecological and cultural systems, and in other parts of the province have unfortunately taken lives in recent years. This pressing issue was the reason that SXFN and I decided to partner to identify the wildfire hazard on unceded crown land surrounding their communities, while also looking for community-led solutions to address it. So we started our research partnership about 4 years ago and finished the research last June. That was when I got my thesis into the library and it was done. So excited about that. It all started though with a legal agreement called an Indigenous Collaborative Research Protocol Agreement that we signed in March 2021. And this agreement upholds principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as First Nations principles of ownership, control, access, and possession, meaning that we got SXFN free, prior, and informed consent for all research activities, and that the data we collected belongs to SXFN and not the university, as per those First Nations principles on ownership, control, access, and possession. So we wanted this research to benefit the communities first and foremost, and to do that, we met both on the land and in the office to co-develop our research with SXFN and also interpret the results throughout the last 4 years. And the knowledge we've co-generated belongs in the SXFN community. So in addition to my thesis, we developed a community report that takes the research and hopefully makes it a lot more accessible for communities, a lot less scientific jargon in there. And that just came out in January. I finished the community report, so pumped about that. The specific focus of our research project was on quantifying the fuel loads, or the quantity of flammable vegetation in the SXFN interface, which is the black dashed lines on this map surrounding the solid black line reserves. SXFN and I wanted to understand how fuels contributed to fire behavior under various weather scenarios and how we may change fire behavior by altering fuels in different ways. Specifically, we wanted to know if SXFN followed BC government legal objectives for mule deer winter range, which is in purple on this map, and old growth management area in gold on this map. And you can see a lot of those areas actually overlap. There's old growth management area on top of mule deer winter range around the communities. We wanted to know what would the wildfire risk for the communities do? Would it be reduced if we followed those legal objectives for mule deer winter range and old growth management area? To give a little bit of background, mule deer winter range and old growth management area forests were established in SXFN territory in the 1980s and 90s to protect vital habitat in old growth forests from conventional industrial forestry practices, which had certainly severely degraded forests in the region in the mid to late 20th century. And while these areas have protected the area from industrial forestry, the legal objectives have been previously identified by SXFN and others in the region as being barriers for proactive forest stewardship that acts to reduce wildfire risk, specifically fuels treatments. And in response to that, there have been amendments made to the objectives in recent years for fuel treatments, but none of the legal objectives or their amendments were made in consultation with SXFN or with their free, prior, and informed consent. As mule deer winter range and old growth management area overlap with 58% of the SXFN interface, their legal objectives are very impactful for SXFN's ability to steward forests closest to their communities based on their own priorities. To quantify stand level fuel loads, we established 37 plots, which are the white dots on the map, in unburnt mule deer winter range and old growth management area forests, where we inventoried fuels from trees, understory plants, soils, and woody surface materials. We found very high densities of small trees at our plots with few larger trees. Many of the small trees have live branches close to the ground, which enables them to act as a ladder fuel. And the median basal area for large live Douglas fir trees was only 18 meters squared per hectare for all plots, indicating a lack of large live trees. And this is important. We will come back to this, but it's important because large live Douglas fir trees are highly valued for mule deer winter range, old growth management area, and for wildfire resilience. To use our fuel data to predict wildfire behavior, we also needed weather data, which we got from Natural Resources Canada. And we used real days from the 2007 to 2021 fire seasons from SXFN territory, from weather stations within the territory. For each of those 37 plots, we isolated 4 fire weather scenarios from this time period, from an average summer day representing moderate fire danger or the 50th percentile fire weather index, or to extremely hot, dry, windy days representing extreme fire danger or the 97.5th percentile of fire weather. Using the Crown Fire Initiation and Spread model in tandem with the Canadian Fire Behavior Prediction System, we modeled stand level fire behavior for each plot under each weather scenario, giving us over 21,000 results. The Crown Fire Initiation and Spread model gives crown fire likelihood as a percent, and based on that percent likelihood, assigns a fire type of either surface fire, passive crown fire, or active crown fire. An active crown fire is of most concern in the SXFN interface, as these fires can move quickly, they burn intensely, they cause mass plant and tree mortality, and are a lot more difficult for firefighters to suppress. In the interest of predicting speed, the rate of spread and the intensity of fires, given fuels and weather, I also calculated rate of spread and surface fire intensity, and we'll go over some of those results as well. When those forest structures meet ignition in hot, dry weather, the models predicted that fast-moving, high-intensity active crown fire is very likely. Crown fire predictions increase as weather becomes hotter, drier, and especially windier. But it is notable that even in the 50th percentile of fire weather, crown fire still dominates the predictions. This shows an example of what some of these plots look like on the ground. And yeah, starting on the far left, with their surface fire plot, this plot was predicted to burn a surface fire under almost all weather conditions. In this picture, you see there's not a lot of dead wood on the ground. There's lots of grasses, but no tall shrubs or small trees. And it's a very open forest with large fire-resistant Douglas fir trees with branches that are high off the ground. And then if we move on to that passive crown fire picture, we've got more dead wood on the ground, some taller shrubs, some smaller conifer trees, but with aspen interspersed and openings between the denser conifer patches that do have branches that are low to the ground, probably allowing patches to burn as crown fire, but it's not likely to burn as an active crown fire. There's not that fuel continuity there. And then finally, on our far right picture, we've got a forest that represents most of the forest we saw out there, frankly. There's deadwood on the ground, moss understory, dense small trees with fine fuels attached. They're crisscrossing probably because of snow press or ice damage. Few large fire resistant trees, perhaps targeted by industrial forestry earlier on. And fire would be able to get into the crowns of trees and move quickly between them. There's lots of fuel for that fire. To answer how fire behavior would change by altering fuel loads, we simulated fuel treatments by altering my measured fuels data. So we created 9 simulated fuel treatments, combining varying intensities of thinning with pruning of tree branches and surface fuel abatement. We had 3 thinning intensities, and the first 2 were based on legal objectives for mule deer winter range. The first removed a maximum of 25% of the live conifer basal area of large trees as per the legal objectives for mule deer winter range. And the second removed a maximum of 35% of the live conifer basal area of large trees as per the 2022 fuel treatment exemptions to the legal objectives for mule deer winter range that the BC government created. And the third, we reduced densities from the smallest trees to a fixed density of 150 trees per hectare. And this is what we call our intensive thinning treatment. And that took out a lot of small trees, leaving large fire-resistant trees to restore an open forest. And 150 trees per hectare was chosen because it's close to historical reconstructions of interior Douglas fir and could act to restore forests to pre-settler densities that were more fire resilient. And we remodeled these things, these new fuel conditions under the 90th percentile of fire weather. Before we get to those fire behavior results, I just want to note on the changes to fuels. After simulating varying intensities of thinning, fuel loads were impacted in different ways. So this box plot on the right shows the resulting variations in densities, basal areas, and canopy covers after each treatment. Gray is the measured fuels. Green is the 25% mule deer winter range treatment. Blue is the 35% mule deer winter range treatment. And pink is the intensive thinning treatment. It is notable that after intensive thinning, basal area and canopy cover are not significantly different than those in either the mule deer winter range and old growth management area treatments because we retain those larger trees in the intensive thinning treatment. When we use these new fuel loads to remodel fire behavior, we found that the predicted fire behavior for the 2 mule deer winter range simulated thinning treatments had little variation from one another, despite the exemption allowing an additional 10% of basal area to be removed from those forests. Thinning alone reduced active crown fire predictions. As you can see, the red is getting reduced, but significant decreases in crown fire likelihood and surface fire intensity only occurred when that thinning was paired with pruning and surface fuel abatement. The combination of mule deer winter range thinning, pruning, and surface fuel abatement produced the greatest reduction in predicted fire behavior relative to the other mule deer winter range and old growth management area fuel treatments. However, in the far right bar graph, we see that pairing pruning and surface fuel abatement with intensive thinning resulted in the highest proportions of surface fire being predicted, otherwise known as the lowest crown fire likelihood of all the simulated fuel treatments. And this fuel treatment also has significantly lower rates of spread and surface fire intensities versus the simulated mule deer winter range and old growth management area fuel treatments. Regardless of the reduced wildfire behavior predictions for this treatment, high intensity passive crown fires still dominates predictions at the 90th percentile of fire weather. So this got us thinking. The fire behavior predictions made us curious about how one might decrease crown fire and surface fire intensities in these treatments, even at that fire weather condition, that hot, dry fire weather condition. So more thinning will not work to reduce passive crown fire, and prune height is already high. Therefore, we needed to reduce fire intensity by further reducing fine fuels. And by reducing fire intensity, we're hopefully reducing flame height. Therefore, we reduced these fine fuels to the median measured fine fuel load at my plots, which was 0.6 kilograms per meter squared. And then we remodeled that fire behavior. And we have surface fire predictions increase and surface fire intensity significantly decreases. A great way to reduce fine fuels, especially to underneath 10 tons per hectare or 1 kilogram per meter squared in this ecosystem, is through returning good fire, aka cultural or prescribed fire, to these lands. And on top of reducing future wildfire risk, good fire would likely have numerous other ecological and cultural benefits in this eco-cultural system. So this research quantified substantial fuel loads in mule deer winter range and old growth management area forests of the SXFN interface, which are a legacy of settler-colonial land management decisions, including SXFN stewardship exclusion, cattle grazing, fire suppression, and industrial forestry. These fuel loads endanger the two semi-remote communities through increasing the potential for active crown fire. Fast-moving, high-severity crown fire would also threaten the multitudes of ecological and cultural services that SXFN gets from their territory, including from healthy mule deer winter range and old-growth forests. With climate change causing hotter, drier weather periods that will increase our fire behavior, proactive forest stewardship is urgently needed here. And this is a picture of the Dog Creek Fire from 2010, which is the closest a large fire has got to the SXFN communities in the past 2 decades. Mule deer winter range and old growth management area forests burnt in 2010 and have not come back over a decade later, leading to a massive ecosystem conversion. And these areas are clearly not serving mule deer winter range or old growth management area legal objectives any longer. While legal objective compliant thinning from below significantly reduces fuels, the predicted fire behavior following simulated mule deer winter range and OGMA or old growth management area fuel treatments is concerning for SXFN, as high intensity passive crown fire still dominates at the 90th percentile fire weather. Given the current fuel structure surrounding SXFN communities, namely the lack of live large trees that contribute to high basal areas, it is unlikely that the forest will recover the large trees valued for mule deer and old growth in just one round of thinning in these forests. So if we're not meeting the wildfire behavior or the biodiversity and habitat targets with these treatments, it's clear that it's time to look for a better SXFN-led solution. These forests will certainly burn, but how they burn is something that SXFN can influence through community-led restoration of ecological and cultural systems that they rely upon. And shout out to the SXFN artists that created these 2 pieces on the slide. More intensive thinning treatments could be a way forward if they remove greater quantities of small to medium-sized trees, but with no significant differences of basal areas between the simulated treatments, intensive thinning would not impact the recruitment of large trees valued for mule deer and old growth. And these treatments could act to restore greater portions of open forest in the landscape after a century of densification and homogenization. Notably, thinning treatments will be most effective if they are paired with pruning and surface fuel abatement. When possible, good fire or cultural or prescribed burning during the spring or fall should be returned to these ecosystems. Notably, SXFN citizens have practiced applying good fire since time immemorial, though in recent years it has been focused on grasses near communities rather than forests. And this is largely because the forests surrounding the communities still have too much fuel to safely burn them in the spring. Other research in dry conifer forests of Western North America has found that the return of good fire to forests after thinning enhances wildfire resiliency and the effectiveness of fuel treatments, while also having numerous other ecological and cultural benefits as well, including the restoration of culturally important fire-dependent plants and the creation of diverse wildlife habitat. And Ashley, could you please talk about the 2025 burning that SXFN has done this year? It seems to be getting bigger every year, and community members are making an event out of it, which is super cool to see.
Yeah, so Stswec'c'tem actually is better at it than high-severity. They burn, if not every year, there's a few years that we had to skip for cultural reasons, but they managed to get a burn on the ground this year, and they tackled a lot of the dry debris and grasses within IR1, like our main community proper. But then they expanded and actually went up into our IR2 area, where the homes are, they're all single family homes, a good distance apart. Some are surrounded by forest, others are surrounded by grasslands. They all operate on their own wells as well. So it was really neat to see the buy-in from the community this year. Like previously it was mostly community members, mostly the men who were doing the burning. This year we worked with our development corp, and they were out there burning, but then the community got behind, like, well, if they're coming through burning, they got behind like cleaning up the community itself as well, which also included removal of like broken down vehicles, a lot of like just rubbish and things that were around the community that kind of people's eyes normally would skim over. So it was really neat to see the buy-in this year, and talks about expanding it next year. Well, we did this year, what can we do next year? The greatest difference that I have recognized, if you look at Stswec'c'm and Xget'tem, because Stswec'c'm has been able to burn over consecutive years, their reaction to seeing smoke and the reaction to fire is a lot different than what we see in Xget'tem. So Xget'tem, we haven't been able to do a lot of any spring or fall burns, and we did have a bit of a fire earlier, well, I guess later last month, Easter weekend, around there. A fire, somebody was grass burning in their own home. They put it out, but an ember must have stuck around, and we end up having a fire. The reaction to the smoke in Xget'tem was very heightened. It was still in the panic phase. There was a lot of confusion in the beginning. So I'm comparing those two, and I see that like good fire wouldn't just be good for the land, it would also be good for the people and the relationship with fire moving forward.
That's so awesome. And we'll get to talk about that more at the end of the slideshow too. I'm so excited. So despite SXFN having Aboriginal title and rights in their territory, there are still critical barriers that SXFN and other small remote communities face when doing the work of proactive forest stewardship and applying good fire. In addition to working with the complex legal objectives that regulate forest alteration in mule deer winter range and old growth management areas, there is large economic barriers for fuel treatments. So for instance, a 400-hectare fuel break was implemented in mule deer winter range and old growth management area south of Dog Creek in 2024-2025. And yeah, this costed about $12,000 per hectare, making it a $4.8 million project that was only feasible through external funding. These treatments do not pay for themselves, especially in remote communities far away from timber or biomass markets, and especially without a community forest and those tabular stumpage rates that make this sort of work at least a little bit more affordable. Following mule deer winter range legal objectives and provincial stocking standards results in large quantities of small trees being retained within this area, even in fuel treatments designed to reduce wildfire risk, therefore not really creating a true fuel break for Dog Creek. And in this case, though the newly treated forest certainly appears to be more wildfire resilient, and I'm sure it will be, than it was prior to the treatment, $4.8 million is spent for treatments that don't fully meet SXFN community safety targets directly outside of SXFN communities. The amount of retention of small trees in this fuel break is not the practice outside of mule deer winter range and old growth management area forests in the region that are being treated, suggesting a clear compromise on community safety simply due to SXFN being surrounded by areas that were established and have been enforced without their consultation or consent by the BC government. On private land, SXFN has the flexibility to experiment with different thinning intensities and resulting forest structures, as well as returning good fire. And this is being done on ranch lands recently returned to SXFN and other areas around Stswec'c'm and other areas in the territory. And this research is fortunately helping to guide SXFN in stewardship for these lands with goals to mitigate wildfire risk, restore vital ecocultural systems, and adapt this part of the territory to climate change. It is my hope that what SXFN learns here can be used in the rest of SXFN's unceded territory, as well as the many other areas within BC and other territories that also have interior Douglas fir in their interfaces and around their houses. I believe that there are win-wins, opportunities for win-wins in stewarding for community safety, as well as the restoration of fire-resilient mule deer winter range in old growth management area forests. But that finding those win-wins will require changing current legal objectives. So recently, Ashley and I got the good news that due to this research and SXFN's continued advocacy in this department, the BC government plans to move an old growth management area that borders a new SXFN subdivision on their reserve lands so that it is easier to steward these lands for community wildfire safety. Well, this is a huge win, and we appreciate the folks within the government that helped make this happen as well. It still does not address mule deer winter range or the overarching issue with BC legal objectives. They will not work to protect these highly fuel departed forests in our current climate. In the spirit of implementing the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, as well as strengthening relationships between Indigenous people and the BC government, the vital work to amend these legal objectives should be collaborative to benefit both Indigenous and settler communities alike. Fire has and will always be part of SXFN territory, but SXFN has the rights, knowledge, and experience to determine how they will live with fire now and into the future. And with that, I will turn it over to Ashley to maybe talk more about emergency preparedness in the communities and the work. I feel like you've made big strides in the last couple of years. And yeah, maybe talk about the research impacts for the community as well.
So through our work with Georgina, I think the greatest achievement, I mean, other than what the science is going to help us with, is the relationship development. It has not only benefited this research, but we have also in the last year or so been able to develop similar relationships with other researchers, some still around wildfire and others kind of more looking at the plants and animals in the area. And the community reception of the researchers has changed significantly as well from before, where there was a lot of mistrust and kind of a hesitancy to make those agreements and collaborate. And now we're seeing a more like, oh, well, that would be kind of interesting, and looking at what else we can start getting through with the science and how we can use that in other departments and in other work as well in community. This research, we are building it into our emergency planning and future work. We're also trying to build it into like treaty implications as well. So we were talking about this recently and using science to turn back time type of thing. So we have our ranches. We're hoping to do more of having a bit more free reign on the ranches that SXFN owns to do more fuel mitigation using like the predictions that Georgina has and the recommendations as well. So we're trying to use that to, we recently acquired BC Cattle Ranch. So they started some work there this year to do a bit of fuel mitigation and some planning there. But we also did a bio blitz on the ranch as well, where they looked at the soils and they looked at just the surrounding area of the ranch and kind of tried to document all the changes, the negative changes that have happened over time with cattle grazing and mismanagement of the lands, and to look at how we could bring that back to its like more natural state. So things like that is what we're trying to do a lot of the planning up front, because we've never really had a say in these things before. So we're not just relying on what we know culturally or what we know through oral teachings, but we're building that on with the sciences that we're getting from Georgina and the other researchers in the area, and using those directly into our planning moving forward. We're seeing that a lot of people are like, well, you know, time. like everything's going to take time. But what we're trying to get people to understand is that even if the worst impact or like the worst predictions for wildfire happen to community, SXFN is still going to come back to the land. Like it's not going to really have that resting period, or we wouldn't be able to stay away from community for very long, especially our elders. So there's already talk of like, well, if this area burns, well, where are we going to move? But it's all within the territory. There's no conversation of like moving elsewhere. So they're starting to look at areas that we could secure or fuel mitigate that are not necessarily right around the community, that we would have a little bit more control of, whether that is on the ranch lands or somewhere else, that if something were to happen, does the community have a secondary place within the territory that we could go set up camp, or that we could go and develop on to live after a wildfire.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I feel like the conversations have really evolved over the last couple years. And yeah, people, I mean, I guess that's what happens when you have so many awful wildfire seasons right after each other. But yeah, it's really cool to see. Huge shout out to the work that Ashley's doing and everyone else is doing in the stewardship department. And with that, we want to say a huge thank you. Yeah, I've now worked with Stswec'cem Xget'tem First Nation for 6.5 years, and it's meant so much to me. Yeah, so thank you to SXFN for your trust and partnership. Thank you to Dr. Lori Daniels for making this research happen. And for Dr. Greg Green, who really helped a lot with the modeling and my field treatment simulations, and the rest of my committee for making the research stronger. And huge shout out to field assistants. My 2021 and 2022 field assistants worked under some pretty stressful circumstances as ash rained down on us and huge fires raged around us as we ironically tried to determine the chance of crown fire in these forests. And so thank you so much for making that research possible. I am now happy, and Ashley is happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Georgina and Ashley. What a great presentation. Just a reminder to our audience, if you would like to ask a question, you can either post it in the chat box and we can address it anonymously, or if you're comfortable, you can raise your hand and ask your question by unmuting, turning on your camera. So I wrote so many questions and notes during that. It was so interesting, and it's a testament to how well you both speak, because I think almost every single one of them you answered almost like 2 minutes after I wrote the question. But I do have a lot of points that I found really interesting and kind of was hoping, if you're comfortable, perhaps we could elaborate on. One of the last things that you talked about, Ashley, was the relationships that have formed between, researchers and scientists in the community. And I was curious if you've seen, or if you think you could see, that those relationships and building of trust with research and science could possibly translate into increased interest within community members wanting to become part of the research themselves, or seeking, a researcher science type role in the future? Or is that something you could see perhaps happening in your community?
It's definitely on our radar to try to promote and to push post-secondary education. And we actually did a trip in over spring break with 5 youth. We went to Ontario to look at some universities, because we have a few students who want to be we have a student who wants to be a doctor. We have a lot of nursing students, engineering students. So there's interest there, but a lot of the conversation I find still in the education system for First Nation students is around fear, right? It's a fear that's built in at a young age, like moving forward. I know it's changed a lot since I was in university, but right from like when I was in school, we were told that once we got into town school or other schools that we wouldn't succeed. So a lot of those things are changing, and we do have a lot of young students who are curious and interested in pursuing post-secondary education, and we're just trying to find, identify the current issues that are stopping that, because there are a lot of, we had, I think they said 8 SXFN grads from last year, and none of them went into post-secondary immediately following graduation. We had a few of them go in starting January this year, but we missed that September area gap. So then we were trying to identify why that was. With the collaborations with Georgina, we had some of those students actually go on in university. And I believe the one is graduating this year. I'm pretty sure she just posted that she's completing this year. So we are seeing more of an interest in that area. So we're trying to bring in people like Georgina, and some of the other researchers actually on Monday are coming into community to do a stewardship type wildfire presentation. So we'll have researchers there who've been studying things like the fisher population. And then of course we have like the tree ring lab stuff going on as well. So I'm hoping that will spark a little bit more interest, and we can continue to do tours across Canada at post-secondary, because sometimes the schools locally just don't strike enough interest in the students. So we are looking to expand a little bit further and maybe get them some cultural education as well from other provinces.
Well, that's really exciting. What a neat initiative to take them on tours of schools. I think that it sounds like you're looking at the problem from so many different angles, which is wonderful, and supporting the youth up and coming. So kudos to you all for doing that. That's so awesome. And I would love to hear it, just out of interest, like how the visit on Monday goes, and if any new ideas or collaborations come out of that, because I think that's of interest to a lot of communities in Alberta as well. When I talk with many of my friends here, it's a common theme on and off many reserve lands here as well. So but I found it interesting. I'm going to stay on the school thing for a couple more seconds here, but I found it interesting because when I speak to many of my friends here, one of the barriers that they feel is hesitancy to leave community and move into like a large urban setting. It, like you said, it's just such a cultural change. But it sounds like maybe there's some excitement about that within your youth, which is
it really depends on the background of the youth. Like for me, 19, I couldn't wait to get out. I wanted to go to the city. I wanted to have that experience. We do have some youth that are like that. We're also seeing it's a lot of the parents as well that are, no, I don't want them to go that far. And so I was trying to change their idea of what far is, because Vancouver, Kamloops, Prince George, that's not far. I did that, and to me it wasn't far enough in some cases, because the tie to community is so strong, and it's more than just coming back on like holidays. And like a lot of my fellow students when I was in university, it was those special holidays that they would go back to their family homes. But for me, it was anything and everything that happened in community. I felt like I had to be there. So I was driving home sometimes every weekend in some months, or every other weekend at the very least, for the first 3 years that I moved away from community. And if you're not able to do that, that would kind of be a barrier as well. When we went to Ontario on the last day, our last night there, we were driving back to the hotel, and I listened to 3 of the students in our car that were talking about when they get home, how they were wanting to talk to their parents, because Vancouver's really not that far when you think about it. So I counted that as a win, taking, not that they were going to apply to any of those schools in Ontario. I believe there is 1 or 2 who are going to be applying to some of the schools we toured. We also checked out U of Calgary as well. And we're hoping to build on that in future years and kind of target more of like the grade 10 range. This year they were grade 11 and 12. So we were kind of more looking at maybe starting to tackle that a little bit earlier, to identify some schools that they can aim for. So it was really cool to hear the conversation that happened between those students and their conversations with their parents. I don't know if those conversations happened when they got home, Time will tell to see if they apply or not, but Vancouver really isn't that far now to them, where that was the big city before the trip.
That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. It's a great story. So, Georgina, it really hit me when you were talking about how with the different treatments, even at the 50th percentile, like the crown fire dominated predictions. And so it got me thinking, and then when you showed, your graphs of when you do the intensive treatment and how much more effective, according to the models, it would be, I was wondering about abilities to implement those treatments in a perfect world where you're allowed to do them where needed. And then you spoke again about the cost. And so first, I really appreciate you being so upfront and transparent with the timeline right off the start of what has led to where we are now. And then being very upfront and honest, I think, with the barriers being encountered. And I was curious if, and it sounds like there have been discussions around opportunities to use perhaps an intensive treatment in areas where you're currently allowed. Could it be used as a project with proper funding to like bolster community capacity and economy? Like, I would assume that, being considered, how can these results be used to kind of help build the community up more? And I was curious if either of you could speak about that.
That's a great question. I, for a long time, was looking into biomass heating. I know Xget, the community right up the road from Dog Creek, has a biomass heating facility on all their community buildings that they take from their community forest. I will say that SXFN has been advocating for community forest for as long as since before I worked there, 2016 probably, and have been repeatedly told no by the BC government. So that's been difficult. That tabular stumpage rate that community forests get and woodlots get make a lot of difference in implementing forest stewardship that's not all about taking out the most merchantable trees. Unfortunately, I did talk to some folks from Xget about that biomass idea about, what if we could just do as many fuel treatments around the community and all of the wood could go and heat community buildings, and we could get off propane, be a renewable heating source. And yeah, I know in the past, the SXFN spends a lot of money on propane deliveries each year, and in the winter, the Stswec'cem school can shut down for a few days if the propane trucks can't make it into the community. So that's a huge deal. So I was thinking about that, but unfortunately, as Scott said, that honestly, it hasn't made fuel treatments more affordable having those plants, and it took a long time, like 8 to 12 years, I think, after the original investment and equipment and infrastructure to get to a point where they broke even. So yeah, I think that there's still so much work to be done, figuring out how to make these treatments affordable. And I feel like part of the solution is definitely trying to make these small trees behind me into a product somehow. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in that regard in the Caribou. We do have a pellet plant in Williams Lake, but it's quite far. The transportation distances add a lot to treatment costs around Dog Creek and Canoe Creek. And then the roads are really bad. So the maintenance of the road so that equipment can even get woody material to market is very difficult. That being said, I think the Economic Development Court, I was talking to Ryan the other day, and he said that they're doing more and more treatments. And yeah, I think that I certainly like that part of building capacity and doing enhancing economic development through having crews be out on the land implementing fuel treatments is awesome. But I will say, yeah, I think someone with a lot of creativity in maybe alternate wood products needs to step in and say, how do we make removing these trees a little bit more affordable? How do we like make it into a product that's useful? Another thing is that a lot of these would be too small to go into making wood chips and pellets. You need a certain wood to bark ratio that these trees are too small for. So yeah, and we don't, pile burning is really expensive and it releases a lot of carbon into the atmosphere as well. So how do we get away from that? Because right now these are just being piled and burnt whenever we do treatments, and treatments require a ton of external money from, say, the Forest Enhancement Society of BC has funding, and the Community Wildfire Resiliency Initiative, or yeah, I think that's it, has funding, but now so many communities throughout BC are looking to do similar work. And so there's a lot of competition for funding out there right now as well. And that was a very long and rambly answer, but short answer, yes. More and more SXFN crews are doing field treatments, which is great, but we still need a way to pay for more proactive forest stewardship.
It was because my question was long and windy as well. I took you on a little bit of a spider trail there. Thank you for that. I have one final question for Ashley or Georgina, if you want to chime in as well. So looking at the timeline and when Indigenous burning was made illegal by the province of BC, and then a slow and I'll say piecemeal reintroduction of rights. Have you found, Ashley, that within your community there was a loss of knowledge, and have the new opportunities to be able to begin using Indigenous land and fire stewardship on a broader scale presented opportunities to pass on that knowledge and continue teachings? And perhaps have you seen any cultural healing or outcomes from that? Or do you feel it's still kind of in the trend of the barriers are outweighing the benefits of the slow reintroduction of rights?
The barriers are definitely outweighing, but we do have some knowledge still left in community. Some of it is through the oral history, more of talking, because it's actually, I had a conversation with my grandma during Georgina's research, as well as more recently because of recent fires. And we asked her, in her memory, her childhood, because she actually lived up on our mountain from birth till she was about 11 years old. And I was asking her if she has a childhood memory or if she remembers wildfire. And she said, well, there was fire, but she doesn't remember the fear around that fire. She remembers fire from her childhood. She just, it's a totally different relationship with fire back then to her relationship with fire now, right? Because my grandma's in her 80s, and when we have fire now, right, she's in our top priority to our priority list of getting her to safety, getting her out of the area. We do have it's kind of a relearning process as well, though, because we do have a lot of young men who do work with fire crews. So when they are home in the fall time and they are, planning on doing burning either in the fall or when it's coming to be spring, it's kind of a blending of knowledge because they have their grandfathers or even their dads in community still, and they're out there using their more their wildfire knowledge, their firefighting knowledge as well, in that burning. So you saw the picture that Georgina showed from this year's burn. A lot of those guys they're gone, they're out of community during summer, which is a problem for us as well, because all of our trained firefighters are usually off fighting another fire when something happens in community. So it was really neat to see that blend of knowledge as well during this year's burn, because more people were there than just the crews. We are trying to revive more on the cultural burning side. Right now it is kind of in the conversation phase in the Xget'tem side. So it's not just that we want to go out there and burn right away, because we have been told that in the past by other nations and other organizations that are like, well, why don't you just burn it? It's like, because we like following the rules. We are a community that, when we do show these, like when we show the picture behind Georgina, or when we talk about it with our community, we do have the people who are like, well, why don't they just do it? Why don't they just go and clean it up? Like, you'd be saving our community. But then when you try to explain the cost of those efforts, but also, you know, the policies that are keeping us from doing that, it kind of turns into a conversation of like, it's really hard to tell them, you know, well, that's kind of more important than the saving of the community, right? Like, those things come into play. And that's what I know when Georgina and I presented this the first time, I was a little bit more aggressive on the communication with people, because it was hard to hear that over and over and over again, right? Like, well, the cost. It's like, well, what's the cost going to be when we're gone, right? Like, when those trees are gone, the community's gone, right? The rebuilding of that lifestyle for us, how long is that going to take? Like, that's going to cost us generations, right? You look at that 2010 wildfire already. There's a lot of, like, nothing's been planted there, like nothing's growing there yet. So very slowly, there are a few things, but not to what it was like before. We don't harvest in that area. There's a whole generation now going on too of youth that never got to experience that part of our territory. And that I don't want to see that for the rest of the territory. That's kind of what we're looking at right now. I ended our very first presentation with like, are we not as important as the deer? Because my time in stewardship, almost immediately I had to learn about mule deer winter range and old growth and those policies, because I was one of those people who are like, well, why can't we just go and do it? And to be told that you're not allowed because of the deer, when you don't see deer in that area, because the deer can't even walk through that, is really challenging. So we're trying to merge that with our community culture and our community teachings, and trying to blend the two. And it's a bit of a struggle, but hopefully we will have young researchers who are coming up who will be able to do it better than I can. But burning is definitely one of the thought processes, and even just some of those smaller tree stands up on the mountain, because that is a very powerful area for us. And every year it's getting worse, right? Every year when we go up there, we have the plants still, but there's no berries on them, or the seasons are much shorter. Even our berry bushes are like our Saskatoon berries, and down at the river, like we were getting hit by like earlier hailstorms kind of in the springtime that are depleting the number of berries that come every year as well. So there's just so many other different challenges to our food security and our medicines that are coming up. And we are starting to look at fire as a solution in cultural burning, not just for our nation, but we're kind of paying attention to other research that's going on in other nations as well around fire and food security.
Thank you. As you're saying that, I kept having words pop in my head. And when I think about the work being done within your community and the partnerships and stuff and all of the holistic system that you're talking about, it's a really beautiful project in some ways. It's difficult, it's a struggle, but it's inspiring, I think, is like the most important word that comes to me. Is you're both very inspiring. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for your time and for being so open to talk and share with us and with the group. I look forward to hearing more. I hope that we can keep in touch and continue to share and get updates. Because I think it is really, really inspirational. And I think that the work being done, as you said, will be of great interest to lots of other communities as well, because this isn't necessarily, it's a unique problem to your community, but the problem set itself is not unique in and of itself. So thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Georgina. I hope you both have a beautiful Friday and a beautiful weekend, and I wish you a safe fire season ahead in your community, Ashley.